Welcome to Center and Circle, where we explore the space between who we are and the world we shape together.
A monthly space for grounded, honest conversations that bridge personal growth and collective wellness. Welcome to our center.
Okay, so I just would like to provide a visual descriptor for those that might, be blind, low vision, or just listening. So I'm sitting in my kitchen in Connecticut, in New Haven, Connecticut. It's all blurred behind me. I'm a white, older female with large dark black glasses on my face and long dark black hair or dark brown hair. And at some point, you might see my black cat go across the screen too, maybe, because that's my house manager. But just to give you an idea of what the visual is. So,
Yeah. And I'm Diane. I am middle-aged, I guess, more than middle-aged, Mexican American woman. I'm in my office with my office blurred. I do have brown glasses today, and very little makeup as I'm looking. And I think I have a pretty big smile. That's kind of one of my characteristics that I like people to take away my visual.
That's a good characteristic that you do have, Diane.
absolutely. Yeah.
This is Arifa. I am a Black woman sitting in my dining room. My background is not blurred. I have my black glasses on today. My hair is in twists and pinned up, and I have a black top on as well. My orange tabby is around here somewhere. You may or may not see him depending on his sleeping schedule, but that is me.
Awesome.
Welcome back, everyone, to another podcast episode of Center and Circle. My name is Arifa Bevan, and I am the founding board chair of the Tengu Center for Community Wellness.
And I'm Diane Carrion, a proud board member here at the Tengu Center. This podcast is where we reflect on how our individual experiences influence the collective and how community in turn shapes us. I'm super excited. Today, our guest is Bettina Thompson, who I know from our past work experiences and a past podcast. She was actually, I'm going to just say this. On the screen, you see the two people on my two different previous podcasts who had the highest ratings and the most actually. Bettina, I don't know if you knew that. Refind, I mentioned that to you before. Yeah, so amazing. This is going to be not to, I don't want to put any pressure on anyone, but this should be a pretty good podcast with that track record. So Bettina, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I just wanted the audience to know, we knew each other from the past. We worked on a lot of initiatives in our company that had to do with inclusivity, diversity, inclusion, and programs that were really robust. But I will say that Bettina did. That's a whole other podcast of all the things that she did. But such an inspiration, and I'm so excited to welcome you here to Center and Circle to continue our discussions of things that we just believe in and work on both in our personal life and our private. So our professional life and our personal life. Sorry about that. So Bettina, welcome to Center and Circle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diane and Arifa. It's an absolute joy to be with both of you, to be in a like-minded space, to have shared some, past history and in a positive way, and to be here again. My name is Bettina Thompson. Green Thompson, out in the wild, is a legal term, but that's a mouthful, so Bettina Thompson's just fine. And I am a passionate learner. As Diane shared, we worked in a large corporation for a while. I was there almost a decade. And I've done many little different, not little, but many different roles and in that space as well as on my journey. And all of that has led me to be passionate about the concepts around inclusiveness, equity, and also looking at the data and what data is revealing. Our past environment really relied on that as a litmus test. What does the data say? And I really have embraced that and found that to be, the efficacy in it. And all of that really points to the value of these conversations, including mental health, in the workplace, which is something that people are like, well, we're talking about that, like the soft skills stuff. And I think right now we're entering into a period of our workforce where these topics are going to become more and more and more important as we figure out what this
Yeah.
future looks
Right.
like.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here, working on some personal projects. I'm also working within the neurodivergent community, and recently working at an organization that supports individuals with autism and other intellectual disabilities in how to have an independent and self-determined life. So really in another learning phase of my life and journey as I expand and deepen my knowledge. So I'm excited for all of those things. Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
excited to have you, Bettina, and so really thrilled to dive into these conversations and topics. But before we do so, one thing that we would love to get into with you first is what we call our centering moment. And this is something that we do on the podcast each episode with each other, Diane. It's also something that's great to do alone. It's just an opportunity to pause, to center, to return to our breath, whether that's expressing gratitude, taking a deep breath, or just reflecting on something that inspires us. And so today we have a quote that you had shared with us that I am really excited to read. Hold on. And so the quote that you shared with us today is, "Sometimes it's the people no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine."
Yes.
And this is from The Imitation Game, stated by Alan Turing. And I'll say it again. Sometimes it's the people no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine. So, Bettina, we'll start with you. What comes to mind when you hear and read that quote?
Yeah, this is one of my all-time favorite quotes. I have a lot. I like thinkers. I like relating back to folks. But this one is one that truly I think I lean on at this point in my journey a lot, because I think of all, especially when I look at what's going on around us and how certain identities and people are being discredited and what we may be losing in talent and value. And but that line was written to capture the life of Alan Turing in the Imitation Game, and it was actually said a couple of times in the movie. I think up to 3 times.
Wow.
Yeah, and so just really, Alan Turing, for people who don't know, was a mathematician and a code breaker, widely credited for stopping World War II because he broke the Enigma code and saved millions of lives. So he really most people consider him the father of computers or modern computing. And in fact, funny, even though Alan was in the 50s, and today the Turing test still is a litmus test that we talk about when we talk about AI. Today, what the invention is, this person left this impression that still is very viable and discussed. The unfortunate thing about, and why this really also resonates with me, is Alan's history. And Alan did all these amazing things, and still is very highly, respected. However, because he had a same-sex relationship at that time in the 50s, he was convicted of gross indecency for this, and for his identity and his choices, and was subjected to chemical castration. And this really just tore him apart as a human, in terms of his dignity and just his self-value, his self-worth. And it wasn't until 2013, I think, that the Queen actually pardoned everyone that had been convicted of that same crime. So it took from the 50s till now. So even though we see that, there's still this stressors that are going on for people who are not living within the system of things, that might be living a little differently. So that's why after his death, there were a lot of folks that said Alan was most likely autistic, and in ways that he navigated things, that his life and the way his mind worked very much in an autistic manner. But again, that's not necessarily how diagnoses work, but definitely we're seeing some of that now that we're learning more about autism and neurodivergence.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things it really says is that what we see is folks that aren't fitting into the norm. So we have, we don't allow space for the fact that neurodiversity, which means everybody has a different brain. So like biodiversity, we are bio different, where our neuro pathways are all different. But for 80% of the population, there's a norm, so 80% have an operating system that is very similar. But for 20% that are diverging from that norm, so neurodivergent, this really poses problems when you're trying to function in a system that wasn't set up to consider how you might be processing that. And I think we still see that. We see this misunderstanding, rejections, limitations, and what we refuse to make room for these people and what a value that they can. And I think a lot is missed when we put these labels on people, whether it's race, religion, gender, neurodivergence, those things, and we just consider them lesser than rather than just different,
Right.
So that's, sorry, I hope that wasn't too much
No,
about
that's
all of
great.
that.
It's
Yeah.
what I was going to say. I mean, the great thing is, what I love about conversations with you, Bettina, is that it comes from a place of not only understanding, you come from a place of understanding people, but you also back things up with data. And nowhere in the in the big spectrum of inclusivity and allowing people to be their true self in wherever they are, in the workplace, in their life, in society. I think that we don't look at the numbers, we don't look at the data of how many of these people who are considered not, the standard, the, not fitting in with, I don't want to say, a lot of people will say normal, but it's not normal. It's just
Typical,
not fitting
yeah.
that standard. Yeah. And, the data behind how many of these people have made a huge impact in our everyday lives, all the things that we're doing, all the things we take for granted. And I think that's super important as we continue this conversation. And we'll talk a little bit more in the workplace, but from a personal perspective, this quote makes me think of my brother Tom, who had cerebral palsy, had limited mental capabilities in terms of, like, I always explain my brother as he was so brilliant, read more books than I ever did at in his life. He just consumed pretty complex books, but he couldn't add 2 + 2. Right. So conversations with him were great, but there were just limitations on some things. But he contributed so much in his own world. He was an artist, and he taught us so much. And when he passed away, what was interesting about when my brother passed away, and this may be true of anyone who loses a sibling, it's a different kind of loss. You almost feel like you've lost a limb. But with Tom, it was a realization of things that it was never a burden. He was never a burden. And you have that. It's a strange thing, but you have this realization that your brother, how much he contributed to your life. Even though there was a lot that has to be done to help someone with disabilities, when they're gone, you realize how rich they made your life.
Correct.
And that's what this quote made me think about, among other things. All the people who are doing brilliant things in the world and are not recognized, or not,
I really feel, I don't want to say think, I feel strongly that what we are doing here, both Diane for Tom and for Alan and for the topic at hand, is we are bringing awareness, but we're also remembering some really great people as well.
Yes.
And the unfortunate reality, as per the quote, is that there are a lot of really great people who unfortunately are overlooked and forgotten. And history is also most of the time written by those in power, right? And often wrong. And so what we are doing here is hopefully inspiring people to hopefully watch The Imitation Game or learn more about Alan, but we're also remembering these great people as well too. And so I just wanted to take some time to to acknowledge that in this space with
A
us together.
1,000%. And I think for those that might be listening, like maybe this, the Allen thing doesn't resonate, or maybe they can't, but I guarantee there's some lane that this will resonate for you. Is it your child that you're thinking, oh, a child can't do that? Is it a race, that race can't do that, or that, culture can't do that, or that gender can't do that, something that there might be a stereotype or a limitation that's being put on by some perceived system or perceived, to your point, Arifa, the person that's writing the narrative isn't always the one that's giving credit to the fullness of what's happening.
Right. I'll make one last point on kind of taking what you both have said and just say on a positive note. And I know that technology, especially right now with AI, there's been a lot of concern and negativity around it and just fear, right? And so, but what I found was being a pretty early adapter to using it, realizing that, how challenging it can be because of most of the people who are in charge of it. But I also, I'll just say that I attended a women's building an app, workshop. And the thing that was just so exciting about that workshop, it was a room full of women. It was for International Women's Day, were the ideas for apps that were coming out of that group of about 80 women. And I thought, ding, 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 here's where it is. You have technology that's allowing you to create an app for your child who's neurodivergent. That was one of the ideas that people had, how to connect with teachers and counselors for, with your child. Like one thing that was mentioned, like when you receive your child who may be neurodivergent, when you receive them from school, you have no idea what happened during the day that might impact them. Having that knowledge, were some ideas that people were talking about. So my point is that, while there can be a lot of challenging things around AI, I also think it's a kind of democratizing like that power and that ability to easily create things that will help our world for the good. So hopefully those apps are being, created faster than others. So that's great. Bettina, with having you here, it's one of the things that I really wanted to talk about is just when we talk about mental health and wellness and mental wellness, but when we talk about that in the workplace, this is every day, right? Every day we are working with people who are on probably different places on the spectrum in terms of what's challenging for them, and understanding that we can't talk about it all the time of where someone's at. And so there's that, I always found that there's that balance of you have to be careful what you talk about in terms of someone's health and wellness. But it's super important to understand your colleagues, to understand people on your team if you're a manager, and what they're dealing with. And so I guess I just want to open that up to, your thoughts on how we deal with mental health and wellness, in the workplace.
Thank you. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but a lot of it is backed up by data. And one of the things, I think you said a few things are of value there, but also, if I may add to them, a lot of people feel like, first, let's talk about mental health versus mental illness. And I'd like to reframe that for someone who might be listening in terms of, well, I don't have mental illness. No, but we all have mental health. And it's just like your teeth, if you want to keep them, you brush them daily. And it is when you don't care for them, you end up at the dentist with a cavity, and or other things, other issues. And it's the same thing with mental health. So it's not brushing once you have the cavity, it's too late then. And so it's the same with mental health. It's not, oh, I'm burnt out, or I'm a crisis now, or, now I need to pay attention. It's, how am I feeling? And I think in the workplace, people think, oh, that's very squishy. That's the soft stuff. We don't have time for that. but mental health is the foundation for everything. It is the foundation for productivity. It is the foundation for innovation. If you're not feeling good, if your brain is somewhere else, absorbed with something else, there is no way you are showing up whole. And there's no way that you are being able to deliver at optimum. And that is what organizations want out of their associates, is optimal performance. How do you get there? And to your point there, Diane, where you say, well, we have to be careful about what we talk about. I don't think that that is what we should focus on, is being careful, but have we made the space for whatever is needed to be said to be said? And I don't think we can make those decisions for people what they need to say, but have we said it's okay to bring forward your concerns? Have we created that psychological safety? If you are feeling that because your identity is other than the majority of your team and something is happening for you, microaggressions or something like that, have we made the pathway for that to come forward without judgment or retaliation? Have we allowed for a space for someone who might be identifying in a different way, whatever it is, their identity, and they're feeling othered, to say, hey, something is off, and to be proactive and saying, okay, let's fix it. It's not always easy. I'm not saying what this is easy, but it is important. And I think, we shared some stats in our earlier conversation. During the pandemic, one of the things that happened was 80% of the entire global population searched for support on mental health. Now, that might not have been for them directly. It might have been the person that they were living with, a family member, or a partner, or whatever the case may be. But mental health certainly became very visible. And so there was a lot of data that came out of the pandemic. These crises usually have some silver linings, if we want to call that one.
Right.
I think it is one, because it opened a window. It made people focus on it. And some of the things that were discovered is your manager has more of an impact on your mental health than if you are seeing a counselor or working with a counselor or physician, than them. And as much as, and sometimes possibly more than a spouse. And part of that is because of the amount of time you spend with them and the impact they have on your psyche and your mental well-being. And so when we think about that, there's two things I think that are really important to think about. One is the managers who have taken on and agreed to the role of people management. They need to recognize their impact. They need to acknowledge, hey, I have to achieve this thing, but I can't crush this person in trying to get to the goal, to deliver results. I have to figure out how to work with this individual to optimize them as a human, to bring those contributions. The reason we hired them, the beauty about their perspective. And the other thing that became very glaring was managers are suffering. A lot of them during that time, they didn't feel like they had the opportunity or the right to say, I'm not okay. Right. And so they're managing people in a not okay state, Yeah. And so in their blinder situation, I just have to get the job done. They're probably not making the space for other people to say, I'm not okay either, So
Right.
you kind of
Right.
have to mirror that. You kind of have to allow for that through your vulnerability. And there is a lot of that, but the bottom line ROI is huge. And when we pay attention to that, so people who are going to sit there and think, oh yeah, whatever, girl, and I understand that's really nice and squishy, but I'm not doing that. Well, what do you want to achieve? You want to
Right.
achieve success.
Right.
You want a bottom line. You want your profits. You want your shareholders happy. You want the return on whatever you're doing. You want those results delivered optimally. Then this is a key part. This is not a throwaway piece. This is a critical component. Pay a little attention to it, set the foundation, create that environment, and you are going to see results. And you're going to get beautiful.
Aretha, there's a lot of head shaking, so I know you want to.
I mean, I don't know how much more I can shake my head, but Bettina, you are dropping so many great things that my fingers don't have the time to type out in terms of what I want to respond to. They can't type fast enough, but I want to acknowledge a few things first. Like, one is I really love that you broke down what we are talking about when we say mental health, right? As someone who comes from the community health space and was talking to people about preventative health and what that really means, and it's so critical to really understand the importance of taking care of yourself before things escalate too far, right? And so I just thank you so much for that breakdown. It's so critical, so important. The manager piece, I think so many of us can absolutely relate to that, especially because we spend so much time at work. And so I want to also acknowledge that I love how you call out that the managers themselves also need support, not only in creating that space, but for themselves too. I think a lot of the time, to what you're saying, because managers impact the employees so heavily, some of the time, from my perspective at least, we don't think about, well, what are the managers going through as well, right? And so I thank you for calling that out. I think that's so important. And for many of us, we are in a place when it comes to work where, although the day to day is very difficult, we may not have the ability to leave, right? And so while we are in these spaces, and even if it's the best workplace, let me just be clear, even if it's the greatest workplace, we should be taking care of our mental health. For those who cannot transition out of something that is very toxic, it becomes even more critical to take care of themselves in this space. And so I just want to acknowledge all of you said so much more, but acknowledge the great things that you've said thus far. The last thing that I'll say is, the one thing that came to mind is something that a former organization that Diane and I had worked at before did that worked really well for their ROI. Because again, one key nugget that you also shared is the importance of the ROI, right? Because at the end of the day, the organizations want productive workers and they want to make money. And so it's so funny saying that and hearing you say that, because it's so simple. Right? But on paper it's simple, but it's not translated enough. But the point that I was going to say is, at this organization that Diane and I had worked at, they had purchased a mental wellness software, meditation software for the entire organization, so folks can use it for free. And what managers and employees leading meetings started to do was, in the beginning of meetings, take 1 to 3 minutes in the beginning of a meeting to just take a deep breath, do a literal 90-second meditation, and then go into the meeting. And when I tell you, it had shifted the environment so significantly, especially when the managers did it. And again, taking a step back, this is 1 to 3 minutes, maybe 5, right? But it's so interesting that just that small amount of time that we all know goes just like that can make such a difference, right? And so it's incredible. I wanted to share that example for those listening, but just to double down on what you were saying about the ROI on that. And if there is an organization that can't perhaps explore that option in terms of that type of application for the organization, one thing I have noticed people started to do at my current org is that they would start meetings 5 minutes past the actual hour or half hour, so that folks can take a 5-minute break to do whatever they need to do, or maybe a meeting runs over, what have you, but giving folks like 5 minutes to just take a deep breath, take a bio break, or just do something just to get yourself centered and ready for the next meeting. So just another example to share as well.
May I add just a little bit to the important point you're making? So I think, just in case people are like, oh, that's nice, that worked at that organization. This is science. So science, neuroscience, what happens is, we all know and have heard of flight or fight. And so as you move, you can be moving from one desk to the other, but the brain is now saying, oh, we're moving, so something is happening in your brain. It's like, okay, so now I'm moving. I need to be aware of surroundings. Am I going to trip in anything? You're not thinking any of this. This is a whole conversation that leads into how biases, evolve. But what happens is your brain is categorizing things, and so you've changed the whole dynamic of how you were sitting at your desk, or in that first meeting and moving to the next one, or leaving what you were doing to go into a meeting. Your brain chemistry is switched. Okay, new environment. So the brain is like, okay, let's evaluate the environment. So when you sit down into that meeting environment, if you do not take a moment, your brain is still like, am I safe? Is everything okay? There's still a barrier that's up. So managers who leap right into, okay, let's pull out the thing, or people leading the meeting that are like, okay, pull up this and get right down to it. you are now missing that first part of the meeting, the value of it. People aren't keyed in yet. But if you can say, how's everyone? Okay, and you can find that centering moment, just like the two of you did at the beginning of this podcast, where the brain can go, oh, okay, we're okay. We made it. We're in the space. I can relax now and engage in this. And so, other than that, what's happening is that first bit where somebody's right out of the gate and trying to make sure they're being quote unquote efficient, not happening. So what's not happening is that's getting lost because the person is not receiving that, and as well as they could. Some will be like, okay, yeah, and they're searching, and people are moving and talking. And when you can get that centered moment, start your meeting with that, just like you shared, you're going to see something beautiful happen. Like people are going, oh yeah, and now they're engaged and able to contribute fully. So I think that's
Absolutely.
it's real. It's just, that's the brain. That's how we walk through life.
Yeah. I think what I wanted to also address is just any. I think we talked about some best practices here, but Bettina, I'd love to hear how you feel that we're doing in terms of, like, we're not framing this in the wrong way where people think, oh, I don't want to talk about this, or maybe we need to stay away from talking about mental health or wellness. How do you feel that we're doing in the workplace? Do you feel like we've got some gains? What differences are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I think it's multi-layered. It's a complex answer. I think we had so much good data that is being ignored, unfortunately, in so many areas, and in some ways you can understand it. In some ways it's ludicrous to me, but in some ways I think the focus right now on what's happening with AI is very important. So I understand why it's getting some focus, and I understand why people are fearful of it, but I think it's not to be feared. I think the thing to be feared is how we're going to regulate it or manage it. And I think we should be taking the lessons from how we rolled out social media and what we're learning now about that, because it was unregulated, it was unbridled, and there were some things that we're now learning about, harm to children, harm to other individuals, mental health, mental well-being, in terms of realizing that these are curated lives. My life, it feels not like that life, but that's somebody's curated life. That's not the reality of life. And I think there's some beautiful things about AI that I think I shared with you and Arifa, that I kind of cried one night thinking about AI, when we think about the fact that this is a collective of all thoughts that have ever been. Ideally, it's still learning, but that's the goal. But there's no one, and there shouldn't be, and this is where I think regulation should come in, because I do see some of these platforms, and I won't name them, but I do have one in front of mine that is trying to put some biases into that process. But if we use the data collectively, now we are taking a very equitable view of content, as opposed to, oh, that was a female writer, oh, that was a Muslim, writer, or whatever. Now we're able to pull this into in a format where it's like, wow, this has really just expanded my thought. If we're using this as a thought partner, and not as the authority, and not as the only answer out there, but as someone who's going to challenge you, it's the equivalent of working on a diverse team, because these are diverse perspectives. If you're asking the right questions, if you are prompting, if you are looking just to be in an echo chamber and for an easy way out, then you're not using AI well. But if you are actually going in and saying, I'm thinking, what do you think? Well, or I want to know if this is correct. If you're really challenging as a thought partner and you're allowing that collective thought to come in, what did Socrates say about this? What did Booker T. Washington say about this? What did Frederick Douglass, what were the perspectives that apply to now? And if you're really willing to allow that level of insight come in, wow, we're in for a really awesome experience. I really feel that. Counter to that, all things good, I use a knife to cook with, and I make some delicious food. Knives can be used for harm. And I think that's the same perspective we need to think about AI with. It's going to be how it's going to be used and how we allow for that. So back to your question about mental health, is I think, we're looking at AI to to address mental health. And sometimes that's good, because I do think we've got this collective thought. But again, it's not the end all be all. And I think one of the things that we're going to really start to see is connectivity. As we study blue zones, as we study longevity, as we study, we learn about people and their longevity. Key to that isn't just what they're eating or their exercise, but it's their ikigai, what their purpose is, feeling that they have a purpose. And that comes from feeling valued. And I think we also talked about, when Oprah ended her show, and she gave her pearl at the end, and she says, people ask me what is the thing that I want to let everybody know, that one thing. And this is how she closed out her decade of, being at the pinnacle of a talk show, was the one thing I learned: government officials, parents, convicts, anyone who I spoke with at the end of the interview, they all ask, how was that? Was that okay? Everybody is looking for validation.
Yeah.
And so I think if we're not creating that validation in our workplaces, all we're seeing is layoffs, but just ignore that and get down to the grindstone for those that are left still in the workplace. We have to acknowledge that, okay, we're validating that those were people that have been impacted, but we now have to do that. So there has to be validation of the humanness at all steps, I guess, is the bottom line. And I think so. How are we doing? I think some people are really trying to do that. I think some people are not even thinking about that. And that's going to be a hard lesson, because I do think, the more you look at, EQ is going to be really important. AI is going to be doing a lot of things. It's not going to be emotionally, I know the sentient conversation is hot. That's a whole nother podcast, but I think, I think we have the tools, we have the data. Are we using it? Are we paying attention to it? Would be my question.
Right. Go ahead, Rita.
Yeah, I want to ask, because there was one thing you mentioned I want to make sure we get back to, but since we are on the topic of workplace, I think one important conversation for our listeners to hear us talk about a little bit is, Diane, relating to your question about what have we seen in terms of improvement, and what can we do better. But I would love to talk about that from the perspective of how do we better support our employees who are neurodivergent, right? And those that we may not know are neurodivergent, but how do we create that space and environment for these individuals, right? And so, Bettina, do you have any initial thoughts that come to mind for that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to there's a couple of things. I think it depends on the organization. I think it starts from day one. And day one is setting up an environment, no matter who you are, where it's, how can we set you up for success? What do you need? So, for example, while I was looking at your beautiful faces, we're all in glasses. And so, glasses are an accommodation. Without my glasses, I would not see you well. So this is a normalized accommodation already. If I walk in with glasses, okay, she wears glasses. But when we have to normalize that some people are going to need some things that are going to allow them to be fully there to deliver the results that we're seeking and to optimize their engagement. And so for someone, whose brain is working a little differently, is the environment okay? Is it okay if I wear headphones? Is it okay? Or, the challenge is that a lot of organizations want full disclosure, but you have to ask yourself as an organization, as a manager, have you created an environment where it's going to be safe to disclose? And if somebody discloses that, are they going to suffer judgment and being thought of as unable or lesser than, back to the original quote? And, are they going to feel, so you have to be allowed to say, if I could have a quiet environment, without having to say why, but just honoring, person works best in a quiet environment, or I work best when I get the meeting notes ahead of time, or if I can, whatever that thing is that you need, it's okay to say that. It could be a mom that is nursing and say, hey, if you cannot schedule meetings between 10 and 11, that would be really awesome, because then I'll be able to fit things around that. Or later start to the day for a single dad, who has to figure out daycare, and whoever or whatever it is, just making it okay for that individual, and this goes for neurodivergent individuals too, not to expect them to have to disclose, but to just be okay to say,
Yeah.
if you are an environment, and there's some great environments where, they're going to understand and value the neurodivergent individual mind that's being brought to the table, then go for it. But that is a personal decision, and you really need to weigh that decision,
Yeah.
just as, someone from the LGBTQIA community might be weighing their decision right now. And I think you just have to honor that disclosure isn't a prerequisition or requirement to providing an environment that's going to set that individual up for success.
That's a really good point. Very, very good point. I mean, there are simple things like I've worked for a company where I was really impressed with at the interview stage that when I walked in, they had a gender neutral bathroom. They didn't just have lactation rooms; they had meditation rooms and prayer rooms that were intentionally put in a location where the sun wasn't hitting or the sun was hitting. Like,
right,
you could accommodate for people in terms of their time where they needed to pray during the day.
Fantastic.
I also wanted to add, listening to the two of you, I think the good news about this corporate world where they're accommodating is that schools are already starting to do that for students. Now, how much that's happening across our country here in the U.S., I don't know. I just know that I know several of my contemporaries whose kids needed to have extra time for a test or needed some kind of accommodation that the school provided. And not just private schools, these were public and private schools that I've seen that. And so it's almost like hopefully we're creating a generation that's going to demand that in the workplace.
1000% good news. My addition to this conversation is what I've seen work really well is managers and leaders making the small things part of the process, the regular process, right? Starting a meeting and maybe pointing out where the closed captions are, just a regular part of the meeting, not asking like, does anyone need captions? Like, you know what I mean? And just making it part of the process. Hey team, I saw this really interesting article on X topic, right? Sharing it here with you all. And trying to encourage conversation and discussion about it, right? And so thinking through like what are those small but big things that we can incorporate on a regular basis to make it more of the day-to-day standard process status quo. This is just part of what we do, and that can absolutely support the environment for sure, and folks feeling more comfortable and more open. But at the end of the day, it's something that should be seen as not othered, right? And definitely part of our regular day-to-day. But I think I've seen managers just need that support with what is it, right? That they can, what are those things that I can incorporate to make this more a standard process?
Yeah,
absolutely.
May I expand on that? I have a little nugget, a little sidebar, a little bit.
Yes.
So, yes, and 1000% that. And so representation is so important, and it's your point, Diane. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is when we think about people with disabilities, right? And people with disabilities make up 15% of the global population. That equates to a population larger than China. And they control spending dollars between themselves. And so this is for all the people that are like, oh, here we go. No, let's talk about dollars and cents. I'm here for it. And they control $13 trillion in expenditures. And so when we think about, oh, wow, we're going to have to hire Bettina and she needs accommodations for closed captions or, mobility support or whatever. And there's all this concern about how are we going to meet that need or how are we going to, well, first off, most accommodations are very cost affordable. They're very cost effective. They usually cost very little. And so when you support someone like that, you're really getting a perspective. When we think about a few things, closed captions. Closed captions we all use right now. I would like the person who's listening to this to not tell me that they haven't looked at a video online and had closed captions on because they couldn't turn on the volume right then. Or you're busy cooking something, you're watching something, and you're turning on closed captions so because you can't really hear the audio or there's a lot going on around you. So what happens is when we start to include voices of people with alternative needs, we start to design better products. And so we see that what we're doing is called universal design. And in fact, this started in Berkeley. And when they started creating these curb cuts, so for people who use wheelchairs to be able to get onto the curb, they created these cuts. And they were being criticized, and law enforcement was out. Now it's a thing. And what they started to do when they saw the city adopt them, people on bikes, people with strollers, people with shopping carts, everybody was using the curb cut. So now we thought we were doing something for this one unique group. Well, everybody's benefiting. And so this became universal design, or something called the curb cut effect. This goes with speech to text. How many people have used Siri? But that was for blind or low vision, so people, when you include those voices and you consider adaptive and accessibility needs, you now are creating something really amazing. And in fact, I learned something. So the electric toothbrush was for support of those that needed things. Now we know that's an optimal care tool for brushing your teeth. A food processor was created for assisting people with mobility needs to chop and cut. And now, how many people have food processors?
Wow.
Yeah,
Amazing. I did not know that.
exactly. And these voices and these perspectives are so vital, and yet we other them and we put them over here and we think, oh, we don't need that. The other critical thing to those that are listening, those that are thinking about their bottom line, and those that think about innovation, the ideas that come up from people who do not have disabilities versus ideas that come up or from people with disabilities succeed 65% more. And the reason is because they live in a system not designed for them. They are critical problem solvers. How am I going to get this thing? I have to do this thing. They have to think through all the steps to success. And so when they come up with an idea or a concept, they have thought that through. So as opposed to someone who's not having to navigate the world like that, they haven't thought of barriers or bottlenecks along the path. So the success rate for individuals who have to think that through have far exceed that. So if you're looking for innovation and you really want an innovative thinker, think of somebody with a disability or a different way of thinking about things, and you're going to really benefit. So that's my little spiel.
That is awesome.
So Bettina, you had mentioned a concept earlier in this conversation called ikigai. It's a Japanese concept, and I want to make sure that we go to that as we wrap up here, because it's so critical to today's conversation, and it's also really powerful, and I want to make sure that we take some time to talk a little bit more about ikigai. So if you could tell us about ikigai and how it just relates to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite concepts in that, ikigai is just knowing your purpose, and your purpose can be anything. And so really feeling that you do have a purpose, it kind of bookends to that being validated or having value. And when you have that, it is the key to what people have said is that spirit of longevity. And so when you look at these blue zones that have been investigated, why are these people living to 100 or more? They feel that I have a purpose, my ikigai. I know my ikigai. I am of value to my community and to others. So I think that that's the basis of it. So in a nutshell, yeah.
Beautiful. And for those listening and watching, so ikigai, it's Japanese. So if you want to research this, which I hope that you do, we always want you to walk away from our podcast with things to be inspired by and look up. So it's spelled Ikigai.
Yes.
And so please, for
We'll have it
those,
in the link too.
yeah, and we'll drop some
Yeah.
links to that.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned also Ikigai relates to something else, right?
Yeah, well, I shared with you, Aretha, that, Ikigai is so important for each of us to kind of feel that and to discover what our purpose is, and this is a lifelong journey for some people, and that's okay. As you evolve, as you grow and you learn, you discover, oh, I'm really good at, or I have a superpower of, or I can do. But what's really important is that we don't stop there. And I shared with you my other thing that I think really is a bookend to this is Ubuntu. And that's a Southern African philosophy meaning I am because we are. And so it's really thinking about the humanity towards others. So not only is it the value of my purpose, but what is yours? And how do I support you in achieving yours? So when we can put those two things together, this Japanese word and this, African philosophy, but we get a holistic humanity. I was thinking about how civilization works well because we put in systems and laws. And what has happened, I think, is people think it has to work this one way. But I think the truth is when we're working in empathy and we're working in respect and we're working in, there can be various ways to get there. The path to the dollar store down the road can be multiple ways, and it doesn't mean there's only one way to get there. And I think we should apply that to our life too, and how we're getting to spaces and allowing for, oh, you did that? That's really cool. You rode your unicycle. That's so ingenious. I would have never thought of that. And I think when we allow for that and we allow and appreciate the beauty in one another and also in ourselves, I think we're going to be in a really good, healthy space. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely beautiful. Diane, what comes to mind for you for that?
Oh gosh, everything. It's this whole conversation, right? We talked about, I think in some ways, maybe there are people that will listen to this podcast and realize that they have a part in making sure that this discussion is something that's normalized in the workplace. Maybe you're a manager and you're realizing you're going to go back to work next week, and you're going to really think about how you're dealing with each employee. I think that it's also important for business leaders to understand, like Bettina was mentioning, like different products that I didn't know, came from somebody who had to do something differently or had to look at things differently. And then we talked about women creating more apps and like their perspective on things, but that it's beyond that, right? I think that we probably are in a time of creation right now with technology. And it's super important for everybody to find their power, their purpose, and to move forward and not just be afraid of the technology, but say, how am I going to contribute in a way that's positive? That's this. I'm telling you, you guys are great podcast partners because it came full circle. I'm so excited about this discussion. I think we left a lot of future discussions if Bettina will join us again. I think that we could
My
have gone
pleasure.
down lots of different roads. So
Yeah.
this was a
Indeed.
great discussion.
It was inspiring. It to what you just said, Diane. Like Bettina, having you here, it reminds me of how every topic that we've discussed so far ties together, from humanity, connection, the duality in the conversations that we have, and the concepts that we're discussing. And it's just, you were meant to be here, but we're all meant to be in this space together as well. And those listening and watching are meant to be a part of this conversation with us. So just thank you. Thank you just for your time
Yeah.
and space.
Thank you for how beautiful each of you are as exterior, interior, and for making space for these conversations for all folks and for different perspectives to be heard, especially in a climate when this isn't, the common thing to do right now, but it's an important thing, and I just thank you both so much for your effort. Oh, here goes my manager, my God, he's decided to make an appreciate Yeah, my
I love it.
I know, my manager. And so
That was
but
perfect.
thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with both of you and the work that you're doing. So thank you.
We appreciate
This is
you,
awesome.
Bettina.
Thank you so much, Bettina.
Thank you as well. You can follow the Tengu Center on Instagram at _Tengu_Center, as well as on Facebook and at thetengucenter.org. Until next time.
Center yourself and expand in community.